So it's great to see you all here tonight. As a co-op consumer owner, we all have a vested interest in Lake Country Power. Tonight you'll hear firsthand how Lake Country Power is meeting the needs of reliability and service, and discuss projects, programs, and rate adjustments and legislative issues. We got a full slot of things to discuss tonight. And before it's all said and done, you might even be able to win a door prize. We got some door prizes, so stick around. We'll be open for questions at the end of our presentations this evening. And again, thank you for joining us. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our General Manager, Mark Bach.
Thank you, Craig. As Craig said, I'm Mark Bach, General Manager at Lake Country Power. First thing I want to do is welcome you all here. Thanks for coming out in the cold. Pretty cold morning this morning. Tomorrow morning looks about the same, but appreciate your attendance here. And then I want to introduce several employees that are here and thank them for doing this. Derek Howe down here in front, our Chief Operating Officer. You'll hear from him after me here. Tracy Wharton, next to him is our Chief Financial Officer. You'll hear from her as well. Ryan Ferguson, one of our senior engineers. You'll hear from him. Greg Schultzenberg, the man behind the camera. He's the brains behind this whole operation and making sure the screens and the microphones and all the things we need to work are functional. So Greg deserves a lot of thanks for these. This is meeting number 3 of 9, so we do 9 of these every winter and spring. So in the back, Stacy Surratt and Amy Schroeder. You probably talked to them at the registration table. And back with them, Scott Twining, a member service technician for us. So if you have an issue with a water heater, you might have a space heater or any of our load management programs, it could be Scott in this area that comes to help you out or comes to your home to work on your issue. But we'll get it rolling right now. I'll bring Derek Howe up, our Chief Operating Officer.
Thanks, Mark. Well, good evening. I'd like to start off by talking about some of the projects that we have, some of the capital projects for this year. All these dots on the map represent all of the projects that we're going to do this year. It's another busy year for Lake Country Power. Last year we did about 90 miles. This year we're doing a little over 100 miles of construction. We do 75 miles of age every year just because we have 6,300 miles of overhead line on the system. So on an 80-year life, we have to do 75 miles every year just to keep up with age. The blue dots represent that aged infrastructure that we're replacing. So every one of those blue dots is one of the 75-mile projects that we're doing this year. You may remember that we hired 10 linemen about 4 or 5 years ago to do some of this construction internally. They do about 60% of it in-house. They've been saving us about $1.1 million every year doing that body work in-house. So it's been great for Lake Country Power. The yellow dots on that map represent areas in the system that are system improvements. So that's where we're adding capacity because there's been load growth. So we're basically building out 3-phase where there's single phase for different areas. And the one red dot is the Grand Lake substation. We have 46 substations on the system and we replace one every year. So Grand Lake is up this year. We'll be replacing it with an underground substation. These are the specific projects here in District 7 that we'll be doing this year. So starting with Grand Lake there on the bottom, we're moving that substation about a mile to the southeast at a better location. If you've seen it, right now it's kind of in a swamp, doesn't have any parking. We'll move it to a better location. It will be all underground designed, so it'll have much better reliability than it currently does. To the north of that substation, you can see that dot number 14. That's along Nichols Lake on the northeast side. We're doing about a mile and a half of replacing old infrastructure. Dot 13 is the Three Lakes area, so that's Rose, Dodo, and Elora Lakes. We're doing just under 3 miles of old line in that area, mostly on the west side of those lakes. Then 12 is along Perry Road and Whiteface Road. We're replacing about 2.5 miles of old copper with new 1/0. And kind of interestingly, on the dot 15 and 18 on the far west side, now those are 2 jobs that we're replacing 1/0 ACSR, and ACSR stands for aluminum conductor steel reinforced. It's a bunch of aluminum strands of wire that carry the current, but it has a steel center rod that supports the weight. Now the lines were built in the 50s, and in the 1950s they didn't understand the importance of the galvanizing process on that steel core rod. And what we're seeing is in areas of the system you might see excessive sag. That steel support rod is deteriorated and those conductors are bearing their own weight. So these are 2 areas that are going to count for about just under 8 miles that we're going to replace of some of that 1/0 that we also have to get off the system. A lot of people ask, you know, a lot of these projects you can see are going back up overhead, and people ask a lot of times, well, how about underground? And underground, we do convert projects to underground, but it is a very long process with the permitting process. It takes us anywhere between 1 to 3 years just to get through the permitting process to convert an overhead line to underground. But more importantly, it's the cost factor. We've been looking at costs recently after COVID, and after COVID, underground pricing has really skyrocketed. Most of the materials for underground are up about 300% from what they were prior to COVID. So an underground project is going to cost you 60% more than overhead. We're finding that we can actually build 3-phase overhead line for roughly the same cost as we can build single-phase underground. So it's a very significant difference. So what that means is we're weighing very closely what options we have when we do underground. It has to be in areas that make sense. Right away, we're on the 5th year of our 7-year cycle. We break the system up into 7ths, and we do it by substation. So in 7 years, we get through the entire Lake Country Power footprint. And again, like I said, we're on the 5th year of the second time through. So the first time through, we worked real hard to widen the corridors. This year, you can see we're predominantly in the southern part of the system. We were here in this area last year. So please, if the right-of-way was done and you see trees that we missed, please call those in. We're happy to come take them for free. You know, we call those danger trees a lot of times if they're on the ends of the right-of-way and they're dead and dying trees. But we're happy to come take those out proactively and avoid an outage. We pay a lot of attention to the right-of-way. We spend about $6.2 million a year on right-of-way. So we put a lot of money into it, and you can see we're working in Bergen Lake, Big Sandy, which is really the McGregor area, Brandon, Cromwell, Gunn, Kettle River, Round Lake, and Solway, so in the southern part of our system. We are planning on hiring a bore crew this year, so in the same spirit of hiring the linemen that we did to save money and have a better quality work, we also looked at boring. For those of you that may not know what boring is, when we put underground cable in, we typically do it, you can either dig it in, you can plow it in with the vibratory plow, big chute that plows it in through the ground, or you can drill it in through pipe. In a lot of cases, we're required as part of our permitting process to bore it. Boring can be quite a bit more expensive. Boring is typically 10 times as expensive as plowing. So it's a much more expensive option, but a lot of times that's the only option that we're allowed to do. It's the only body of work that we're 100% reliant on the contractor for, so we don't have any internal capability to manage the costs with this. And I'm sure you've seen lots of fiber companies boring, and there's a lot of boring going on, so it's a body of work that's been very busy. And so in order to meet the timelines that we have, we're looking at hiring a bore crew, and we believe that we can do this, again, at a cost savings of roughly half of what we're paying a contractor. We're going to start off by just doing new services and service rebuilds. So just for members that are calling in for their new service, or if you're calling in and you want a capacity change, you need a bigger transformer, you're adding load or something. Because in those cases, we would want a Lake Country Power employee to be the one that's working with you in your property, in your yard. That's a very personal relationship, and we want to make sure it's a Lake Country Power employee that's doing that. So, but the rest of the projects, all the other blue dots that I showed you and yellow dots, those jobs will be done by contractors still. So it'll just be new services and rebuilds that we'll be doing with this one crew that we hired this year. And we're currently hiring, so if you know anybody that's interested, please encourage them to apply. Finally, I'd like to talk about our Saginaw outposts. So we have 5 outposts on the system. Saginaw is on Industrial Road, obviously in the Saginaw area. It's going to cost us just over $2.8 million. We are rebuilding that. You can see to the left there, that's what the current outpost is. It's a pole barn. It's the only one of our outposts that's a pole barn. All the rest of our outposts have drive-through bays and have been modernized. This is the last one we need to do to get that caught up. We are building it with the capacity to have 7 drive-through bays, so we can have a mechanics bay, and we will have the ability to potentially have a future construction crew housed out of here if we want to take on more of that body of work and increase those cost savings that we were able to do so far to date. And with that, I'm going to bring up Ryan Ferguson, our senior engineer. He's going to talk to you about demand response units and load control.
All right. Hope everyone can hear me fine. I apologize in advance. I'm on the tail end of fighting a cold, so if I squeak up here like my teenage son, that's what's going on. As Derek said, I'm a senior engineer here with Lake Country Power. I want to talk about what we're calling our load control modernization project. You might hear us call this by a few different names. The DRU project, demand response system, our load management system. It's just kind of another way of saying the same thing. What we're doing is we're replacing our obsolete load control equipment. These are the devices that are on the side of your homes that interrupt for your water heater, your air conditioner, maybe your heating loads, things like that. These devices have been deployed, and I'll show in a later slide for how many years some of these devices have been out there. But we have about 16,500 of these devices on the system, and we are leveraging our investment that was made into our AMI system, Advanced Metering Infrastructure System, that started back in 2018 when we invested in a power line communication system for all the new metering. It made sense to leverage that same investment for our communication to these devices. So it was a way we were able to kind of double up on that investment that was made starting back in 2018. So what is load control? I hinted at it. Load control is really the ability to shed load when needed on devices that are in your homes that you're receiving a reduced rate, sometimes called our EnergyWise programs. You're receiving a reduced rate where we can interrupt you during really high peak times and things like that, things like tomorrow morning. If you're signed up for our load control notifications, you'll be getting an email, I think, at 7 tonight or a text tonight that says we're controlling tomorrow morning with the high energy demand that'll be on the system. But you might have a dual fuel heating system. You might have off-peak heating, water heating. We have some EV programs now if you happen to drive an electric vehicle, and various other programs that are available to our members. As always, if you have more interest in these type of programs, some like Scott and Amy, they deal with this every day in the back, or you can find anyone of us from Lake Country Power. So Great River Energy is the GNT, generation and transmission company. That is who we, or co-op I should say, that is who we buy all of our energy from. GRE administers all the load control events. They do it economically when energy prices are high. They do it during monthly billing peaks when the demand and across the system is really high. That's what tomorrow is looking like. And then they also do it during grid emergencies. Fortunately, this hasn't happened too often, but they are prepared to shed those loads should they need to in case of an emergency where it's really, really needed at that time. So GRE announced the end of life of the current load control system that they administer. They did this back around 2015, and they did this for a variety of reasons. There's increased failure in all the equipment that's used to do this. There's parts that are needed to keep it working that are no longer available. And then the support, all the software support, the people that know how to work this and can help solve problems for you, they're no longer there anymore, and the companies are ending that support. So really the time came where they needed to kind of force that decision that a different direction was needed just because of the equipment hitting that stage. So what is a load controller? I like to use the stoplight analogy to kind of understand or explain kind of what that load controller is. This load controller, ultimately, it's an electrical relay or a bunch of electrical relays that just interrupt your load. Kind of like a stoplight, green light, everything is good, electricity is flowing. You can use that device, that water heater, that heating system, that EV charger. You can use it as needed. That's green, everything's good. Traffic's low, can flow freely. We'll skip yellow for a second. Red light. Red light's that load control event. That's what we're going to be doing tomorrow morning. I think we did it a couple nights ago as well when we have to interrupt because of that high demand. And you see that savings again in your energy charge for that usage for us having the ability to do that. Now that ability to control that load, I should note too, that saves everyone money. To be able to keep those costs low during the coincidental peaks, that's money savings that every member sees every month. To get back to my yellow light's kind of the warning, just like it is in traffic. Yellow light's that warning, and we do have tools available to that. There's a Smart Hub app, if you're familiar with that. Within the Smart Hub app, you can sign up for load control notifications. You have the option of receiving a text message or an email that describes when and what we're trying to control if needed. We do that preemptively when we know that load control is coming so that we give you a chance to maybe plan accordingly, maybe turn up your thermostat a little bit, turn it down in the winter or summertime a little bit ahead of that event, things like that. So those warnings are available through our Smart Hub app. We'd be happy to help you get signed up for those, and they're a real useful tool just to be ready and plan for those load control events. I'm not going to quiz everyone on this, But I really wanted to just show this slide to kind of help drive home that this investment in load control has been happening predating the 1980s. And we've been using 6 generations of equipment to be able to do this. And as you'd imagine, equipment that was installed in the 1980s, even the 1990s, it's starting to be well past its useful life. Support's no longer available. Parts fail when you handle it. We find, especially in this cold weather, even opening some of these devices, the plastics will crack just because of the age they're at, especially in the cold. So it's just another example or another way to show you that we've been invested in 6 different generations of equipment, and now we're going to be on one common platform, one modern platform that allows flexibility to maintain these programs and keep them available to you. So what does it mean to you? I don't have pictures on the left of all 6 devices, but those are 2 of the devices that might be on the side of your home today that are controlling these loads. Those are the devices that we're changing out. We're replacing it with a product from a company called Aclara. On the right, on the top there, that's a demand response unit or a DRU. That's the new device that we're investing in and exchanging. We've been doing this body of work off and on over the last few years. Some of your homes may have already been changed, so if you're wondering, do I have this device yet or not? That's what it looks like on the right. Now, we are deploying it kind of in a spread out manner. It's techs like Scott in the back, our 7 member service techs, that are spread out through 5 of our different buildings that are doing this body of work. So they're doing this body of work and dividing it up in a way that makes sense to where they normally work so that we can be efficient, minimize that windshield time and such. So this body of work is happening system-wide, and it will continue on. We are targeting a project completion in 2027. We have done a little over a third of the devices have been changed out at this time, roughly 6,200 out of the 16,500, leaving us a little over 10,000 to go. If I were to update the slide today, we're probably a hair under 10,000 as I speak right now. But this work's going to be ongoing year-round over these coming years. Continuing my stoplight analogy, like all projects, there's moments where it's green lights, full speed ahead. We've had plenty of those. We've had some yellow moments where we're kind of proceeding with caution and going a little slower. Things like March and April when we have heavy snow, typically it makes some of that work harder. And then there's been some moments where we've had to stop, evaluate, and make changes along the way. So this is a brand new device that we're working with the vendor on. And it's proven just to give us a few hiccups along the way. But we are a little over a third of the way through the system. We are going to be working hard to get this project done. And you'll likely be seeing one of our techs at your location if you have one of these devices and that hasn't been changed yet. So with that, I'll be passing it off to Tracy. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I am Tracy Wharton, the CFO at Lake Country Power, and part of my job is numbers, and I get to talk about the numbers and work with numbers, and tonight I'm going to enlighten you a little bit on how 2024 ended up. This information is hot off the press. We just did our first close for the year yesterday. This is a graphic that we share monthly in our newsline. I'm going to use this as a guide to offer a bit of insight as to how 2024 shaped up. And then at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about the rate changes that took effect on January 1st. Just a side note, it is all preliminary information, has not yet been audited, so subject to change. So taking a look first of all at our revenue and kilowatt hour sales. Our operating revenue at the end of the year came in at just a little over $111.2 million. This includes all of our kilowatt energy sales, our demand revenue, our service availability charges, security and street lighting, and then other miscellaneous charges that we may incur, such as penalties, delinquent costs, and so forth. That all gets rolled into that $111.2 million. You can see about a $5 million difference between this year and 2023. If any of you were here last year, we talked a little bit about deferred revenue. That really is the big driver for the difference from year to year. I'll touch on that a little bit later. Our total energy sales were just over 692 million kilowatt hours, down a little bit from the prior year. As you all are aware, which you can't tell over this last week, 2024 was a pretty historical year for weather. We had extremely warm winters. We had warm summers, and that really resulted in that overall decrease in our kilowatt hour sales in 2024. This number I just like to share. I kind of think of this as our touch points. We have 51,480 active services throughout our service territory. This represents all of you. They're touch points for us. We send out bills every month for over 51,000 members and active services. We serve each and every one of you from billing, member services, E&O, all of those, each and every month. This is a very important number because it represents all of you. Taking a look at the other side of things from our cost of service. Our total cost of providing electric service to our membership in 2024 was just under $105 million. $55.8 million, or just over 53% of that, was our cost of purchase power. Ryan mentioned that we purchase all of our power from Great River Energy. They are the G&T co-op, and we're the distribution co-op that gets your power from there to you. And looking at the next line down, those other operating expenses of over $49 million. That's a little more of an all-encompassing number. It includes our distribution and operation maintenance expenses, our consumer account expenses, administrative and general expenses, as well as depreciation and interest expense. The O&M, consumer accounts, A&G, those are a little more of the obvious costs, I think, that members think of when they think about expenses. Our employees, the work we're doing out in our service territory, right-of-way maintenance, like Derek mentioned, member outreach, but also included in that $49 million is depreciation and interest expense. And that was almost $20 million for our co-op in the year of 2024. We do borrow a portion of our annual work plan that Derek kind of talked about every year. And as you all, I'm sure, are aware in your daily lives, interest rates have at least doubled for us over the last couple of years. So that's a big piece of the puzzle. Also, depreciation. Our utility plant increases year over year. Nothing's getting cheaper. Something that cost $300,000, a substation transformer back in 2020 is now $1 million. All of those costs get rolled into our utility plant. And a function of that is we have to depreciate those costs over a certain period of time. As our plant grows, our depreciation expense grows. Both that depreciation expense and that interest expense, we as an electric co-op are required to make sure that our rates cover not only the purchase power costs and the O&M, the consumer accounts, A&G, but we have to make sure that we're also covering our depreciation and interest costs. And again, as those things continue to increase, it adds additional pressure on our rates. So where does this all bring us? This brings us to our margin, or our bottom line. At the end of December, our total margins were about $10.3 million. We had a decent year. It was a challenging year, but we met all of our loan covenants, and we did have favorable margins. Our operating margins, the operating piece of that, all the things I've just talked about, was about $6.3 million of that total. And non-operating was just over $4 million. And when I refer to non-operating, those are transactions that really aren't directly related to us serving power to our members. Just as you are a member of Lake Country Power and you get your capital credit allocations, we are a member of Great River Energy, and they do the same for us. They return patronage or allocate patronage to us. That's included in that non-operating number. In addition to, we've made some minor smart choices. Just like interest rates have increased on the borrowing side, we've also been able to take advantage of some minor favorable interest rate on some of our bank accounts, so that's also included in there. So that leads me to some necessary decisions that staff and our board had to make moving into 2025 with regards to our rates. I would imagine most of you have heard about this already, but just to kind of give you an outline, rate changes took effect January 1st. The rate changes that were made were related to GRE wholesale power costs. We call it a pass-through. I'll try to explain that a little bit more. But the rate changes we made were directly related to rate changes that we are seeing this year from GRE. It includes our residential and our commercial members, our general service and load management programs, the programs that Ryan referred to, our energy and demand sales. On the bright side, no change to that monthly service availability charge. So this rate change really was a pretty all-encompassing and a wide-ranging change for us. To alleviate additional rate pressure, that $5 million deferred revenue that I referred to a little bit earlier, we moved revenue from 2023 to 2024. As things turned out this year, we did not need to recognize that revenue in 2024. We're going to take that $5 million and again shift it one more year ahead, which will help us with alleviating some additional rate pressure for the increased costs that we continue to see outside of purchase power that roll into that cost of electric service. So this is a simple pie chart of what our 2021 or 2025 budget looks like, rather, $121.5 million. When I talk about a pass-through for purchase power costs, hopefully I can make this work, maybe not, that dark blue piece on the right-hand side, the rate increase that was instituted on January 1st was done to cover the cost increases that we're seeing on that blue big piece of the pie chart, that 52%. That's the impetus for the rate changes that we made on January 1st. So when you talk about the other 48%, what are we doing to accommodate or to try to work through the year so that we don't have additional rate changes needed? That $5 million deferred revenue, that's going to play a big piece in us being able to keep the other side of that pie chart flat, as well as we have to continue to be prudent fiscal managers. We have great staff, we have great employees, we have a great board, all with trying to keep you, our members, front of mind and making choices that serve us all so we can continue to offer you safe and reliable electricity. So what does this really all mean for you, or what might it mean for you? I just put together a simple rate change example looking at a member who might use 1,000 kilowatt hours of general service in a month, 1,000 kilowatt hours on our off-peak program, and 1,000 kilowatt hours on our dual fuel program. Everyone in this room uses electricity different. This isn't going to apply, but to make the math simple, we'll take a look at this. So if you look at our rates from 2024 and you work through that math, your monthly bill would be $323.40 for all the electricity, the service availability charge, flip to 2025, and this is what you might see. It's about a $15 increase in a month. Again, you're all going to use electricity different, but to give you an idea, the general service rate changed about 5%, and this is a winter month. Our off-peak rate's a little bit more. That's a direct result of changes we saw from Great River Energy. And then dual fuel's right at about 5%. So this gives you somewhat of an idea. We do have rate sheets in the back. If anybody is interested in grabbing one, there's a couple of different versions of this. We always have people willing to pick up that phone and talk to you if you have questions about impact that this might have for you. And we also do have information on our website, so we have a more, a wider breadth of information on all the different rates on our website. So with that, I'll quit talking about numbers and talk about something that's a lot more inspiring. Before I turn it over to Mark, we're going to share a pretty incredible story with all of you. As an electric cooperative, we operate according to a core set of principles and values. Two of those are cooperation among cooperatives and concern for community. I can't think of a better example than what we're going to share with you. In mid-June, one of our line workers, Ben Hoyt, and 13 other line workers from across Minnesota and Iowa electric cooperatives traveled about 2,800 miles to a very small village in Guatemala to bring electricity to that village. This video that we're going to share will give you a glimpse into the contributions Ben and the other line workers made and the impact their work had on this village and the people who live there. Keep in mind, this is not 1924. This happened in 2024, and I think you'll find it pretty interesting. Thank you.
We came to Guatemala to help build some power lines into a village that's never had power before. The 13 other guys and myself are in Guatemala, and we're building a line to a village. I think it's 3.5 miles. We wired 30 homes, I believe. So, we started from scratch. We, roughed everything in, pulled the wire, and turned the electricity on for them.
I expected it to be rugged, and I didn't realize how unready I was, because it was wild. It was up and down and a lot of physical labor.
We had string wire with the help of the villagers over big canyons and through the jungle to get it to where we needed it to be. Long spans, 1,200 foot span was the longest. We had a 900 foot, and I think 600 foot also.
A lot of wires everywhere, putting wire on poles that were sticks, basically. It was whatever it was we could do to make it work.
Teamwork is great. It doesn't matter. You get a bunch of guys from different states going together, and they just fall in and start doing their thing.
Everybody kind of just went to work. Nobody had to explain everything. For 14 guys from all different co-ops to work together smoothly and everything, it was pretty amazing, to be honest.
Was it hard work? Yeah, but the villagers were there at every step of the way to take whatever bags, whatever tools you had, carry them to the next spot. They pulled all the wire out straight down the mountainside and straight back up the next side.
They carried our gear bags out for us because it was too muddy for us to carry them and get trucks in there. Right, without the locals, my gear bag probably would have stayed in the village.
Small kids to the oldest gentleman in the village, they were right there wanting to do whatever they could to make your life easier, even though we're there to make their life easier. Working in a house, we had two boys with us. One was 9, one was 12, and I had asked, what is one thing that you're really looking forward to with getting electricity? And they both agreed that just having light, so they didn't have to use candles anymore. And I had also asked another gentleman, he was 53 years old, lived in the village his whole life, and he can't wait to be able to get a fridge just so they can keep food.
I can use a blender and the iron to iron the clothes, and a washer to wash our clothes.
I think we are going to live a life that is different now because it was difficult without electricity.
If you have the time and the want to come down to a place like this, it's an absolute blessing, and you will definitely not regret putting your time in. Step out of your comfort zone and do it. You'll see great things, you'll do great things, meet great people.
All right, I'm back. We're really proud to have somebody like Ben work for us. To have an opportunity like that come up and you seek volunteers, and Ben's hand went up and said, "I'll go." I'm pretty proud to have employees like that. And if you asked him after he came back, would you do it again? I think he would tell you in a heartbeat. So these opportunities come up periodically. So I suspect going forward we'll have more employees willing to go do that. So really cool for him. Hell of an opportunity. Interesting. You come back and talk to him about it. It was pretty wild. You saw how hard it was for some of those guys to even stand up in that mud. And he said the locals were carrying their gear bags through it like it was no big deal. But let's shift gears a little bit from that feel-good story to something that, a cooperation story to something that hasn't been so feel-good. Switch to legislative stuff, and I'm going to talk mostly about state of Minnesota issues here. And if you've been following the legislature in the state of Minnesota, I would say dysfunctional is probably an understatement for that. But at least today everybody's there, so they can get some work done. But where it sits right now, in the House, the Republicans have a 67 to 66 majority. There is a special election coming in mid-March where it's expected that'll go to 67 deadlock in the House. In the Senate, the Democrats have a 34 to 33 majority, and then we have a Democrat governor. So if anything is going to get done, they're going to have to work together. And if they've got a proven inability to do that, certainly recently, so maybe that's better for us if they can't get along and can't get anything done. I would say from an energy policy perspective, maybe it's best if they can't get anything done for us. But there's two specific priorities we're advocating for in this legislative session. One of them, and I'll talk about both of them in detail. One of them is lifting the moratorium on nuclear energy generation in the state of Minnesota, and the other one's about net metering reform. So on the nuclear moratorium, what is it? In 1994, Minnesota passed a law banning the construction of any new nuclear generation in the state. And why this is relevant now, if you look at the 2023 legislation that Minnesota passed saying that energy sold in the state of Minnesota has to come 100% from carbon-free sources by 2040. They passed that without a real plan, right? So we were in St. Paul, it was 2 years ago, right about now, saying, okay, I know what you're talking about. You've given us the what, we need to reduce carbon emissions. You've given us the why for climate reasons. You're missing the how. How are we going to do this? And the answer we largely got was, you will figure it out. You will have to, which is a little frustrating. The plan was hope that we'll figure it out. But in reality, we're not going to be able to do that without being able to have nuclear power in the mix. We'll simply not be able to be 100% carbon free and keep the lights on without expanding nuclear capability in the state. Minnesota's the only state in the nation right now that's got an all-out ban on nuclear generation. What we're advocating for is the ability to have the conversation. If you lift that moratorium, it doesn't mean nuclear plants are going to start popping up everywhere, but it allows us to have that conversation and do the assessments, do the studies, and find out if it makes sense, where it might make sense. Then you start to do the analysis, is it cost effective? But right now, you can't even have those conversations because you couldn't build it even if the plans were rock solid. So there's legislation that's already been introduced this session. It failed to make it out of the Senate Energy Committee a few weeks ago. But I'm being told that it's going to resurrect itself, and it's going to have some more hearings, and it's going to have its day on the House and the Senate floor. There appears to be fairly broad bipartisan support for this, but we'll see. So by the numbers a little bit, talking nuclear generation, I'm going to get this laser beam to work here. Maybe. Can you see that red one way up top? U.S. capacity factor by energy source. So what is capacity factor? Capacity factor is a measure of the energy produced by a given plant compared to how much would it produce over a period of time if it was running at full capacity, right? So with nuclear, you're looking at about 93%. So producing like 93% of what it could at max output for a whole year. Geothermal is the next best at 71. We don't have really much for geothermal opportunities around here. What that is taking steam from the ground and then spinning a turbine with that and generating electricity. Some areas out west where some of those geologic resources are closer to the surface, they're able to tap into that underground heat and spin turbines, but really not an option here. Natural gas about 55%, coal about 49%, hydro at 37%, wind at just under 35%, and then solar on this, and this is a national average, solar at just under 25%. It's worse than that here. You look at northern Minnesota, you're looking at a capacity factor for solar around here, probably sub 15%. And that assumes you're brushing the snow off of it every time. So if there's even a dusting of snow on it, it's going to go to zero. You know, our nights are long in the wintertime. It's pretty dark. We all live here. It gets pretty depressing. November, December, you feel like the sun never shines at all. And then, you know, this week, you see the price you pay for sunshine in the winter. When it's sunny in the winter here, it's 25 below zero. But anyway, those are just some numbers. That's just showing that nuclear really is the most effective source of power generation that we've got available to us. Up here on the right, that's a football stadium. I don't know who's playing, doesn't matter. All the spent fuel from all the U.S. nuclear generation since the 50s would fit inside that football stadium at a depth of about 10 yards. So the reason they passed that moratorium, part of the reason was fear of what are you going to do with the spent fuel. But I just want to put it in perspective that since the 50s in this country, you would be about 10 yards deep in one football stadium. So we're not talking about a ton of spent fuel. You know, spent fuel from one person's lifetime would fit inside one pop can. And then land use, this is important, especially to us in rural parts of the country. The land you need to produce 1 million megawatt hours of power. If you're going to do that with wind, it's almost 18,000 acres that you would have to put windmills on. To do it with solar, you're 3,200 acres. And then to do that same amount of energy with nuclear facilities is just over 100 acres. You know, so land impact and energy density is what they call it. So nuclear is by far more effective energy density for what you can get from the land impact. And if we're going to be serious about decarbonizing, this is the way. Shift a bit to net metering. We're looking for reform of net metering. And what is net metering? Net metering is the law that governs how we have to treat if somebody's got their own power generation at their house. In most cases, it's solar. In most cases, that solar's on the roof. It's just an example, like member-owned solar. And how it governs how we have to treat it if they're producing more than they use and we have to buy it back. So net metering governs how that is. And what it is, state law mandates that we have to buy that back at about 2 times the cost of our wholesale rate, which is what we could have bought it from Great River Energy for. Minnesota is the only state, again, here we are standing by ourselves, that allows individuals to oversize their installations and sell it back at a profit in cooperative territories. And with that carbon-free by 2040 legislation, I'm going to explain in a minute why this policy is a bit outdated. But first, I'm going to explain why it's expensive. You know, we're forced to pay a retail rate for any excess generation on that we could purchase at a wholesale rate. It's just not a sustainable business model. Imagine if you owned a small business and you sell products, but you were forced to buy them from your distributor at the same price you sell them at, and you still have to cover your own costs. You're not going to make it. You got to have the ability to cover your own costs, but they're dictating that we have to buy it at the same price we sell it at. Costs about twice as much for the same amount of energy from a small system than it would from a larger, like utility-sized system. So you're getting the same amount of carbon reduction at twice the cost. And then it's a really slow and expensive way to decarbonize the grid. Here's why it's outdated. So with that carbon-free by 2040 legislation, there's no longer the argument that we have an environmental incentive to keep this subsidy in place, right? So if it's got to come 100% carbon-free from the grid, you can't make the argument anymore that, yes, this is bad policy, but there's an environmental reason where we're okay with every other member subsidizing this member, because now it's got to come carbon-free from us. Minnesota is the first state in the union to implement this type of language. We did it back in 1983. And the reason we did it was to help, an industry in its infancy, help them to get off the ground. Well, right now there's more solar being installed than there is any other generation source across the country. So, it's time to move on from helping this industry get off the ground. This is the one that bothers me the most. It's inequitable. Those who can least afford to do that end up subsidizing the panels and the costs of those that can't afford to do it, those that can afford to put up an insulation on their house. The low-income households that don't benefit from that excess usage and making profit on it are the ones that bear the cost. In a cooperative, we have to pay that, but I don't want to say losing money, but basically losing money on it, and it drives the rates up for everybody else. And there's studies that show those who install those systems are wealthier individuals than those who don't. It just makes sense. And in Minnesota, it shows that gap is widening. So co-ops exist to provide cost-effective energy to all of our members. But we need to distribute that cost burden more fairly. This really bothers me that it's the people it harms the most are the people who can least afford it. What are we looking for? A balanced approach, something we can get behind. I'm not standing up here saying I'm anti-solar. I'm not, but I have a hard time really getting behind and supporting it when I know that there's an inequitable subsidy built into it. I know it's harming other people financially, so it's hard for me to really push this. But if we could make it more equitable, but what would make it more equitable is that if the statute said whatever you're going to put in has to be sized to the load of your house. We've had some where there's very little load and somebody puts up almost 40 kW installation where they're never going to use as much as going to come out of there. So, and they're doing that and they're making money on it. They're making it on the backs of the rest of you. We want it sized to load, and if there is excess generation, we want to have to pay for that at avoided cost. And what avoided cost is, we didn't have to buy it from GRE. That's great. We'll buy it from you for that same amount. And then it's not harming anybody, and we can help you, we can support you. That way we could get behind it, and you could probably think I'm anti-solar. Like I said, I'm not, but then we could help people do it, and we could support it. Switch a bit from legislative stuff to some grid reliability concerns. If you've paid attention to the electric industry or been to any of these meetings over the last couple of years, you've heard me talk about this. First, I'll explain the couple of acronyms up here because I'll get into some of their studies in a bit. But the one on the left is NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. What NERC does, what their job is to review and do assessments of the national grid, what the reliability concerns are, what it looks like in the future. They do a long-term assessment of 5 years. They do seasonal assessments like the coming winter or the coming summer. They fall under FERC, another acronym, speaking in alphabet soup up here, but FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, falls under the federal government's Department of Energy. And then MISO is the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. MISO is the regional grid that we're a part of. Goes from Manitoba down to Louisiana, and I've got a map coming up. I'll show you exactly where that is. But what are our concerns related to reliability? We're putting an increased reliance on intermittent sources of power, and mainly that's wind and solar. The technology to fully transition to a carbon-free world, if we can't do it with nuclear, doesn't exist. It certainly hasn't been deployed. And MISO and NERC, those two I just talked about, have issued warnings of potential energy shortfalls in the not very distant future. And I'll get into the reasons in a minute. And then MISO has studies have shown that once you exceed about 40% renewables on the grid, it becomes exponentially unreliable. And a second piece of that carbon-free by 2040 legislation, so that was talking about all energy and carbon-free. There's a second piece of that that's called the Renewable Energy Standard. And what that says is that 55% of Minnesota's energy has to come from renewable sources by 2035. There's an important distinction between carbon-free and renewable. So the difference there is nuclear is carbon-free, but not considered renewable. Large hydro is carbon-free, but not considered renewable. So 55%, 10 years from now, has to come from renewable sources, which is small hydro, wind, and solar really here. Biomass, there's some arguments whether biomass counts or not. They haven't decided in St. Paul whether that's going to count or not. So the NERC assessment, this was just completed in December, so it's fairly hot off the press. What it says, that red area in the middle, that's MISO. That's the regional grid we're a part of. And what this assessment looked at a 5-year period, so the next 5 years, it shows MISO is at high risk of energy shortfalls in the next 5-year period. And that's high risk at normal operating conditions, not talking extreme cold or not talking extreme heat, under normal conditions. Reasons for that, MISO said, resource additions, and by resource additions I'm talking power generation, are not keeping up with generator retirements and demand growth. So what's factored into this are utilities that have announced closure dates for coal plants or natural gas plants, or I mean, it's carbon emitting sources. So a lot of utilities have already announced closure dates, and that's factored into this. And NERC's waving the flag a little bit, saying, be careful, hang on, you're at high risk here if you do that. This graph on the bottom isn't super important, but it just tells you what's in the resource mix there in this NERC assessment. The blue on the bottom is coal. The really light orange line above that is fuel oil. There's some fuel oil generation. The gray stuff in the middle is natural gas. The blue above that is solar. You can see there's growth in solar and not much growth in anything else. Above that in the green is wind. Nuclear is the dark blue at the top, just going along steady. No additions, no retirements planned. And the demand growth they're talking about is being driven by, if you've probably heard this too, data centers and artificial intelligence. There are massive data centers being talked about in Minnesota, all over the country, hundreds of megawatts. And what it's for is to be able to serve the needs of artificial intelligence. There's tremendous power usage for that. And right now there isn't the grid capacity to be able to do it. And there's lots of them kicking the tires on trying to locate where they can locate, where they have capacity for power. So some of them are looking at, can I locate right next to a power plant and then just buy all the energy? And now utilities are saying, well, we'll pump the brakes, right? That doesn't seem fair. We were here first, and data centers are willing to pay more than we would. So if you're a power plant operator that's not a utility, that's a better deal for you, but then it's financially harmful to all of us who existed before that. So data centers are a real hot button issue right now across the whole country. And then also driving demand growth is the push for electrification of everything. The one top of mind is transportation. Right? There's a lot of push to push us towards electric vehicles. That would drive a lot of demand growth if everybody bought an electric vehicle. And quite frankly, and Derek would back me up on this, if everybody plugged in an EV all across our service territory, there's no way that we would have the capacity to serve that. There's also a push for home heating, electrifying home heating, getting rid of gas appliances and electrifying everything that you do. Back to MISO a bit. This chart on the right, on MISO's website or MISO's mobile app, you can look at any given time and find out what's serving the load in MISO. This was January 21st, so a little less than a month ago. It was one of those mornings that was like this morning, about the same temperature. And if you look at what was keeping the lights on at that time, you're looking at 71% was coal and gas. You throw nuclear in there, you're up to 82. This one's actually pretty good. Wind at 12%. If you remember that last cold snap, it was windy, which is helpful. But yeah, wind actually showed up. But we got to be really careful about taking coal and gas off the grid before there's something suitable to replace it. Similar story with extreme heat. This was last August, one of those really hot summer afternoons. In this one here, wind and solar were almost nothing. It was one of those dead calm, cloudy days through the entire MISO footprint. These days happen. And in this case, coal, gas, and nuclear almost carried almost the whole thing. MISO ended up even importing energy from other regional grid operators to be able to keep the lights on in this situation. These are 2 days apart in early January. I got January 5th and January 7th. But the story I want to show you on this one is what happens when it is windy versus when it isn't. And the northern part of MISO has become pretty reliant on wind, and a lot of the future plans are to build more wind. In this January 5th day, wind was at 20%. And pay attention to this green part here, because 2 days later, that green part went down to 4%. And what filled in for it? Take a look at the blue part. When the wind went away, natural gas is what picked up that load. So we really need to have some sort of energy that's dispatchable. What I mean by dispatchable, you can call on it when you need it. So there are what they call wind droughts, and it could last for days. But if we put too much reliance on that, and we don't have something that we can flip a switch and that can kick on fairly quickly, we could have a problem. And natural gas generation is carbon emitting, so that does fall under that carbon-free by 2040 law in the state of Minnesota. Okay, shift away from that, just a couple of upcoming events we've got, and then we'll open it up for questions. Project Green Touch is something we do every May. We'll pick a state park and help clean up the state park after the snow melts. Hopefully the snow is gone by the 8th of May this year. We're doing it at McCarthy Beach State Park in Side Lake. And you know, much like your front yard or backyard, when all the snow melts, there's shit everywhere, right? So the state park's got the same issue. They need people to come in and help clean that up. So bring a rake. You don't need a state park pass for this day. They'll let you in there for free if you're helping to rake up the park. So that's awful nice of them. But from 10 to 3, there's RSVP info here, and I think there's some sheets at the back that's got Tammy Zahn's info on there. Another one, and this one's fun. This one doesn't require work gloves. This one in September, we're organizing a tour. You'll be able to tour Great River Energy's headquarters in Maple Grove. Tour the ACES Trading Center, and what ACES does. ACES handles the power marketing for GRE. It's kind of, if you've ever been in there, most of you probably haven't, there's screens all over the place with different graphs and the cost of power coming out of whatever different units, and what ACES is doing for GRE is, you know, placing energy hedges, like buying energy a day ahead, trying to insulate themselves from what could be a wild spike and then would drive up costs. So it's pretty interesting. Tour ACES. Tour the Elk River Peaking Station. This is a natural gas peaking plant. And the peaking plants are those gas generation I was talking about that can be kicked on almost at a moment's notice when necessary. They don't run for many hours in a year, but when they do, it's because it's necessary. So you get to see one of those. Then go to the Twins game against the hated Yankees. And then 2 nights at the Staybridge Suites in Maple Grove. Includes transportation for one low price of $225 per person, so a pretty good deal. RSVP to the same person as Green Touch, Tammy Zahn in her office, but you got a few months for this one. You don't have to sign up with us till August, but that one will fill up. It filled up fast last year. Last one, our annual meeting's coming up towards the end of April 24th. It's up in Grand Rapids this year at the Rife Center. I realize that's quite a ways from here, but we'd love to have you join us. Now we'll open it up to any questions. Scott in the back has a microphone. If you could raise your hand and wait for him.
Hi, Valerie Cush from the Saginaw Twig area. A couple of questions about Ben down in Guatemala. How long was he down there for? And is this the first time one of our employees have been able to partake in something like this?
Yeah, Ben was gone about 2 weeks. Some of that's travel time, but yeah, and it is the first time we've had an employee volunteer to do this. You know, it's been going on for years. This time they wanted Minnesota, Iowa, and they asked the Minnesota and Iowa Co-ops, and first time we've had an employee throw his hand up. But I suspect it won't be the last after he came back and said how enjoyable it was. But
John Olsted from Cotton. How long does it take to build a nuclear plant, and how many nuclear plants are in the state of Minnesota?
Yeah, how long does it take? That's largely an unknown. There's a lot of regulatory and permitting issues and then lawsuit issues, just like trying to build anything else. Minnesota hasn't built one in decades, so what does it take to build one here? I don't know. There was just one built in Georgia, and I know that took a lot longer than they had planned. It was much more expensive than they had planned too. But what was the second part of your question was? How many are in the state of Minnesota? 2. There's one at Prairie Island, southeast of Minneapolis, and then one in Monticello in the Northwest Metro. And Xcel Energy owns both of those.
Bob Yankovich from Friedenberg. Just wondering, I've only lived here about 3 years, and we see a 5% rate increase in 2025. When was the last time we saw rate increases? Why did that happen? And then what relative increase was it, or comparable increase?
Yeah, so we didn't do one in 2024. You're right, 2025 was about 5%. 2022 and 2023 we did. And big drivers for that was what happened to supply chain issues post-COVID or during COVID. We saw our material costs increase on average about 60%. The stuff got hard to get. You know, lead times that were weeks turned into years. We had all kinds of issues with that. I would say as a percentage, Tracy, they were similar to this last one. None of them pushed 10%. I know that. They were in the 5% range each of those. But what do I expect going forward? We're going to start, like we saw this year, we'll start to probably see bigger increases on the generation and the transmission side. From Great River Energy, as more transmission gets built out to accommodate more renewables, and as generation is going to have to get built, and that's going to come at a cost as well. But do I have percentages for you? No, I have asked for those percentages. I'd love to know them myself. But
Okay, thank you. One more question. In Guatemala, we've got a crew down there that's building lines, and when they leave, what happens when a line breaks? I mean, who's going to be around to fix it if no one can put up the lines?
Yeah, I heard so that batch of guys went in, built it, and left, right? So they had said where they're connected to was a city that did have electric infrastructure. This was just 3.5 miles away that didn't. So there are qualified line workers that can come and help them out. But.
Gotcha. And then one comment. I've heard that plan possibly nationally is that in order to solve the energy situation we have and other places do, that they're developing mobile nuclear reactors so that it's not going to be quite as expensive and takes long to build. Have you heard much about those?
Yes, so there's several companies doing it. They're called small modular reactors, or SMRs. And what they are, I know NuScale is one, GE is one, Westinghouse is one. They're all kind of trying to race to be the first one to get one commercially in operation. But I know more about NuScales than any other ones. They're at 75 megawatts apiece, and you can scale them, basically stack them side by side, I think up to 12 of them. But they're built in a factory and then transported and set up on site, which is what should help it certainly be more cost effective. You know, you can factory build them and building them all to spec, and you know, you're not constructing everything on site. So NuScale had a deal in Idaho that ended up falling through. I'm not entirely sure why. Right now there aren't any in commercial operation, but it feels like they're close. So it would be a much more cost-effective solution than a traditional large nuclear plant that gets built on site.
Yeah, my name is Rich Johnson. Are you 100% totally relying on Great River Energy year-round for all your power?
Yes, with an asterisk. And why I give an asterisk on that? We have an all requirements contract with GRE, meaning we have to buy it all from them, but there's a two-way contract. They have to sell it all to us. Whatever we come with, they have to find a way to sell it to us. We do have the option to do about up to 10% of our own self-generation. What that could be would be, say we wanted to build our own wind turbine or two, probably one would be enough for 10%, but it's just not cost effective for us to do that. We could build our own solar installation, but it's not cost effective to do that when we could be partners in a large one that GRE is a part of. But we do have the ability to self-supply up to 10%. Right now we're not doing that.
With the change in the politics nationally, do you feel that the Minnesota mandate where we have to be carbon-free can be changed, or can you lobby to get it done? It sounds like with the new era of politicians we have in Washington, you could, or Excel could maybe, Great Energy, they could maybe run that another 20 years, who knows? The fuel is there, the coal is there, right?
It is. So two things there. What's the change in policy federally isn't going to supersede what the Minnesota state law, which is the carbon free by 2040. But right now things are moving at such a fast pace in Washington, D.C., and things are flying out of the Oval Office so fast that I'm not sure we fully understand what the impact a lot of those executive orders are. From an energy policy perspective, though, it should be helpful as far as, you know, making sure we can run our coal and gas plants until something suitable can replace them, which is what we're asking for. But related to the Minnesota carbon-free by 2040, that has nothing to do with Washington, but something needs to change with that. There needs to be some sort of a common sense revision to that, because the way it's written is just totally impossible, and I think people are starting to realize that.
I was with an engineer, this is a number of years ago, and he was coming from a meeting in New York, and we shared a seat together on a plane, and talking to him after being to this energy meeting, what he was telling me, now this is 20 years ago, he said, what you're going to see in the future is you're going to see small generating stations with fuel cells, like going into an industrial park, and those will be fueled by natural gas. He says you won't see the large high-tension lines going into a substation. They were going to try to do it with natural gas, and I was wondering, is there anything like that could possibly still happen?
Yeah, so there's a lot of development and a lot of things being talked about related to fuel cell technology. None of it's commercially available or commercially operational. In that case, if it's fueled by natural gas, it's not going to be allowed in Minnesota because that carbon emitting source. But we can't, as utilities, plan on what might be available by 2040. Right? We need to have a little better plans than that. But yeah, there's a lot of different technologies being worked on, but there's nothing commercially available that can make this work yet.
My name is Rick Callender from Saginaw. Couple questions. Is there any particular representative that we should be contacting about this that maybe has more power to change that legislation, and who passed that legislation? I mean, we didn't vote on that.
No, you didn't. The State House and the State Senate in Minnesota did. You live in Saginaw, so do I. Grant Hochschild, Senator Grant Hochschild is a critical voice in Minnesota. It was the House and the Senate Democrats and our Democrat governor that passed that in 2013. Grant is one of the last remaining rural area Democrats. And in the Senate, there's a 34-33 advantage for the Democrats. So Grant is a critical voice. If you know Grant Hochschild, he is your senator there in Saginaw. So I'd suggest reaching out to him.
Is there any reason why we're trying to follow California's ideas in the coldest state versus the warmest state in the country? It's asinine.
You're not wrong. Is there a reason? I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense. You know, if you look at what has happened there, you know, from an energy perspective, why do we want to go down that same path?
Yeah, they're failing there. Why are we following a failing principle? I mean, people need to wake up. One thing I want to bring up is, has anybody ever been to Casper, Wyoming? Okay. If you ever have been, that's the largest landfill in the United States for spent blades off of windmills that they have not figured out how to recycle 1 square inch of them. And a lot of people don't know that. That landfill is probably close to equivalent to the Hibbing mine hole, filled with spent blades from Denmark, imported, that we do not know how to recycle. So why do we call it green energy? And we are correct in I'm not a crazy bird lover, but we are killing thousands of birds every day with those wind blades, because they're in the path of the path of the birds flying south and north.
Yeah, they're in the flyways.
Why doesn't the people get to know that before they go all gung-ho about this wind energy and solar energy? The truth needs to be brought out about the damage wind and solar energy does. And the last point I have is, has anybody ever been to a glass factory? Have you ever watched, if you could, how fast that meter flies around in a circle to make glass for those solar panels? The energy it takes to make one solar panel probably could fire your house up for free electricity for about 2 years.
Yeah, there's some studies on
So
that. It takes more energy to make that than you're ever going to get out of them.
And
yes,
that's exactly
the
what
fuel
we-
is free. The fuel is free on wind and solar, but not the cost of making it and not the cost of disposing it.
And then you can't find silicon sand hardly anywhere because they're using it for chip. But that's the kind of stuff you should put in your newsletters for people to understand that green energy is not green energy. It's a hoax. So all I would ask is people need to seek the truth, and they would be a little bit maybe more hesitant about going on this green caravan, when I think the best thing we could do is figure out how to burn natural gas, fuel oil, and gas as clean as we could, and you're going to be miles and miles and miles ahead. God didn't put that oil on the ground to have it sit. He made it for us to use, and also with the wind and the solar and the nuclear. So that's my comment.
Hello, I'm Shelby Trost, and I've got cabin property in this particular district. But my question is simply a follow-up from what the gentleman to my right had asked about, and that is the mini nuclear, the mobile nuclear. Does Minnesota have a moratorium on that as well?
Yes.
So everything.
Everything. And that's where Minnesota is the only state with a total ban on everything. So the ones that have been lifted recently have been lifted to allow that type of small modular reactor technology. It's fairly similar technology to what the military has been using for decades in submarines and aircraft carriers without incident. So,
yeah.
But yeah, we couldn't do that if we wanted to either.
That's what I thought. Thank you for answering my question.
Okay, if you get your tickets out,